In this video, I'll walk you through the cruncher step by step, showing what each section does, what information you need to enter, and how it helps you assess whether a development opportunity makes financial sense before you move forward. I've chosen an example site in Bentleigh East, Victoria, very standard site, nice and square, nice and flat, and it's just a good standard dual lock site that we can use for this example. All right, starting on page 1, we enter the site details. Now that includes the address bar here. Then you have the purchase date and feasibility date. They are both defaulted, but you can overwrite them if you choose. Then we have the acquisition deposit, which is defaulted to 10%, but you can update that if needed. The settlement in days is 120 days. We've got that set at 90 as a default, but I've put it into 120 for this example. Below that, we have the development design. That's just a brief description of what you intend on building on the site. Page 2 is where we start to look at the site details, starting with the land assessment. Now here we have the total area, which is at 625 square metres, the frontage at 15.6 and the depth at 40 metres. This is considering a rectangular site. We then look at the site coverage available for the construction. So what we're doing here is we're calculating the maximum ground floor footprint for the entire development. This is going to vary from state to state, site to site, depending on the zoning and other factors. So we've broken this down into 2 options. Option 1 is the coverage percentage. Now this is based on the zoning for the land, and that could be varying depending on your state and your area that you're in. Now, Victoria now, it's very, very common to have a 60% coverage, so we've defaulted to that, but you can change that depending on the zoning for your site. Now that calculates out a coverage area of 375 square metres available for your ground floor footprint. Option 2 is the build envelope available. This is calculated by knowing the garden open space requirement. Again, in Victoria here, it is a standard percentage, so it's either 25 or 30% or 35%, depending on the size of the land. That will default in this particular spreadsheet, but you can override that depending on your site details. Then you also need to calculate the hard surface areas. So that is typically your driveway. Now, for a dual lock, I would assume that would be close to 80 square metres. So once we've calculated the garden open space area and the driveway area, we total out at 358 square metres for the second option. What the calculator will now do is take the lowest of those 2 options and put that in the bottom line here with your green heading. In this particular example, it is 358 metres squared. So that is the maximum footprint that we can put on the ground floor on that site. Now that we know the maximum coverage for the footprint of the dwellings, we can calculate the dwelling sizes. Now this is done by entering the number of dwellings for the site. In this example, it is 2. We then convert the 358 metres squared into an approximate footprint per dwelling, but it also converts into building squares. We use this in the office more commonly, and also real estate agents and builders are very familiar with talking around building squares. You can convert that to metre squares if you choose. Now that we have the maximum footprint possible per dwelling, we need to take into account the level 1 floor area. Now that typically is a ratio between 80 and 90% of the ground floor area. Once we do that calculation, it will provide us with a possible total dwelling size of 36.6 squares. You will now notice on the bottom line, the maximum dwelling size has been automatically populated in that cell. But for this project, we want our townhouses to be 30 squares, so I'll override that and I'll enter 30 squares per dwelling. Now that we have all of the details of the site and the dwelling sizes in the feasibility, we start to look at the costs. Now this starts with the acquisition, including your purchase price, the stamp duty, which is automatically calculated, but you can override this depending on your state and area. Then I've got a nominal figure in here for the fees and adjustments coming in at $5,000 and legals for your conveyancer at around $1,500, but you can enter that whatever your conveyancer might charge you. I've also included a line item here for the buyer's agent fee. If you have a buyer's advocate working with you, you can enter the amount that you've agreed with them in that cell. For this example, the acquisition costs have come to $1.9 million. We now look at the soft costs for the project. Now this includes the consultant, council, contractors, your demolition and all of your design costs in that top row. For a custom dual lock development, I would suggest that would be close to $110,000. We then have a line item here for project management. If you're engaging a consultant such as Little Fish, you can enter their PM fee in that cell. Below that, if you are building 3 or more dwellings, the open space contribution can be added here as a percentage of the land valuation, and that will depend on your area or council. You will now see the total cost for this project come in at $110,000. We now move on to page 6, which calculates the construction cost for the project. Now on page 2, we nominated 30 squares per dwelling, so you will see here a total building area of 60 squares carried over. Next, we enter the build rate. I have nominated $28,000 per building square, which gives us the total build cost. Then I've got a line item here for additional earthworks. If there is any slope or fall on the site, for this example, I've just added $30,000. We then have a line below that for other construction costs. This might be for pools or anything outside of the build contract that you can see. We then have a contingency. For this project, I've allowed 5%, but talk to your lender about the requirements are for your lending. We then have a total construction cost of around $1.8 million. Now that we know the construction cost, we can calculate the holding cost. Now this is broken out into 2 different sections. Firstly, we have the land holding cost. Now this is calculated based on the entire project program, which for a townhouse development, we would suggest 24 months. You will see here in the terms cell is at 20, so that's 24 months less the 4-month settlement. You can also enter your deposit percentage and the rate percentage. You're then provided with the total loan value and the amount for the holding costs for the entire land holding period. The second section is for the construction holding. Now this is separate because you draw down based on the construction contract program in different stages. So therefore that ratio we find is around 65%, but you should talk to your lender to find out if they have something different that you need to enter in that cell. That then provides you with a total holding cost of around $216,000. And if I scroll to the bottom of the page here, you'll see the total project cost comes to just on $4 million. The next section is the part that we like, which is the sales and outcome, where we can enter the revenue, starting with our forecast resales here under the realistic column heading at $2.4 million. Now, you can see here that we've got a pessimistic and optimistic column as well. These figures are based on the scenario variance above here, which I will select at $150,000. I'll enter that, and you can see there the pessimistic and optimistic sales for this particular project. Once this has been entered, you can see here our total GRV for the project is $4.8 million. We now subtract the project costs, the real estate agent fees based on the percentage you can enter here in this cell here. We then look at the GST calculation based on the margin scheme. We have 3 rows here to consider. Firstly, you've got your total GST payable, your GST claimable on cost. Now this is money you can get back throughout the course of the project, which will help with cash flow, but then ultimately will need to be paid at the end of the project. There is also then a balance that will need to be paid at the end of the project, and for this particular example, it'll be about $92,000. With all that information in mind, we can now generate our net profit for the project at around $600,000. We have a net return on investment or return on cost coming in at 15%, or a net return on equity or return on cash coming in at 52%. Page 7 provides 2 charts. Firstly, we have an equity chart which outlines the cash required for the project at each stage. And the second, we've included an investor summary chart. Now this is if you have a partner or a family member you want to go into the project with. You can enter the number of investors here, and that will provide you with a cash required for each investor and also a net outcome for each investor. Page 8 is a summary of all of the project costs, the revenue, and also the outcome. If you scroll down to the bottom here, you can click on this link to download a PDF report. The PDF report displays a clear summary of the acquisition, soft, construction, and holding costs for the project. Below that, it shows the sales and outcome in the realistic, optimistic, and pessimistic formats. Page 2 shows a summary chart for the equity and investor summary. That's a quick example of how to use the Little Fish Cruncher. If you have any questions, reach out to me on the Little Fish Network.